my technology is the bane of my existence. Uh, so there you go. Yeah, we're recording, right? So, again, hi everyone and welcome. My name is Felipe Martinez. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the executive director for Circle. Circle is a new department on campus that stands for the Center for International Relations and Cultural Leadership Exchange. It's a long name, that's why we go use the acronym Circle. And we have two main charges at the university. One, first and foremost, to support our international students, and second, to provide opportunities for domestic and international students to engage with each other. The University of Washington is known as a global university, so our goal is to replicate a little bit of that global experience on campus. And this particular event, the Global Leadership Series, is an event that we offer to students as an opportunity to have them for students to engage with alumni, to so they'll be able to learn from their trajectory and then be able to learn from their experience. Um, and then the guest for today is Dr. Anu Taranath, who's a faculty member at the University of Washington, and I will give a proper introduction in a little bit. So let me give you a quick background of how the event is going to go. So, like I said, it was an opportunity for students and alumni to come together. But one of the things that we realized as Circle staff is that as we're pushing students, or encouraging them, I should say, to think about a global perspective and then potentially consider a career abroad, we forgot the very fundamental step, which is why is it that and to encourage students to engage in self-reflection as to why is it that they want to pursue a career abroad, and how potentially their own identities and their own experiences could influence their experience overseas. And that's why we invited Dr. Anu to be able to engage with us in that experience. So the way we're going to do this, we are going to ask for questions of Dr. Taranath. And then after that, we're going to turn it over to you for you to ask your questions based on the what she's saying. One of the things that we like to do in these events to help us process and to be able to just really engage in deep thinking as on the conversation is to use breakout rooms as an opportunity for everyone in the audience to engage with one another. We find that has been successful because it allows for everyone to be able to engage in a smaller space about the conversation. And then once we're done with the breakout rooms, we'll come back, wrap up, and then we'll be done with the event. Um, and then lastly, how to engage? So there's two ways to engage. If you want to ask a question, we encourage you to use the raise the hand feature under the participants tab, and then I, as a moderator, I'll call on you for you to be able to ask your question. If you decide to ask a question, well, one of the things that we encourage you to do is to turn on your video if you're able to, introduce yourself, if you're a student, your major program, and then share your pronouns so we'll be able to address you properly. Similarly, if you prefer to type your question on the chat box, you're more than welcome to do so, and I'll ask the question on your behalf. And lastly, one of the things it's very difficult to sometimes replicate in this model in Zoom, the engagement, and then be able to engage with participants. So because kind of like we know we feed off the energy of the audience. So in an effort to replicate that, we encourage you to use the reaction buttons. So if there's anything that Anu says that really resonates with you, the use the thumbs up, the clap, the little festive emoji to make sure that we know, or the heart. Thank you, Anu. Um, so with that. So now, before we get started, it's always good for our speakers to know who's in the room, so that way you'll be able to see who's in the audience. So we have a very short poll that's going to ask you for your affiliation with the University of Washington. So if you could just take a minute to tell us who, if you're a student, a graduate student, faculty, staff, alumni, or a friend or community member, so that way we know who's joining us today. Okay, there you go. That's everyone. Thank you so much. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to share the results. And we have a good mix of people. We have students, faculty, staff, some alums, and community members and friends and community members. So thank you all for participating. And Anu, hopefully that gives you an idea of who's in the room with us today. Um, so now let me close this. And now that we have this, let me give you a proper introduction of our guest speaker today. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if you give me 1 second, let me read her bio. So Dr. Anu Taranath brings both passion and expertise to her work as a speaker, a facilitator, author, and educator. She's been a University of Washington professor for over 20 years and teaches about race, gender, and global literatures. As a racial equity consultant, she works with the city, county, businesses, and nonprofit partners. Her book, Beyond Guilty Trips, Mindful Travel in an Unequal World, was named a finalist for 4 book awards, including the Washington State Book Award. It was also listed as one of Forbes Travel's 13 books to inspire your travels and Oprah Magazine's best 26 books, travel books of all times. If you haven't had a chance to read her book, I would highly encourage you to do it. So with that said, let's practice using our reaction buttons. And can you help me welcome Dr. Anu Taranath?
Thanks, Felipe. That's very nice. I'm so delighted to be here with you all. It's wonderful to see those of you that have joined us today. Many of you are coming together from all different parts of my life, if I know you, and some new people that I'm eager to talk to tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for joining us. So let's start with the first question. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and how you became interested in addressing issues of diversity, equity, and social change?
I've been thinking about how to answer a question like that because I think, like a lot of people, my path to what I do now seems so natural on some level, but it was quite circuitous, right? I started out my studies as an undergraduate in computer science and did that for some time because that seemed like the sensible thing to do in the late 80s and early 90s. And as I moved through that major, had very little opportunity to wrestle with the questions that had always been quite unsettling. What does it mean to be us? We were an immigrant family. What does it mean to be in this country and be not white? What does it mean to be in this country and be not Black? And trying to figure out where we fit in a longer history of race, belonging, and not belonging really preoccupied much of my youth in ways that I didn't even have the language to talk about, actually. And somewhere in the middle of college, started realizing that there's an entire field devoted to these kinds of issues. I couldn't really believe it. I thought it was just me. So when I started reading and taking more classes in the humanities and social sciences, developed an appetite and a passion and a home in these kinds of conversations that I've never quite left. It's been definitely home, not always comfortable, but it's a home that I return to over and over again. Throughout graduate school, I studied similar things as well. And now at the UW, as you shared in your introduction, I teach about many of these ideas. I'm also a facilitator, and I'm in lots of spaces outside of the university where I'm holding space for people to navigate some of these tensions and the complexities of belonging and race and power and whose voice matters, whose voice has been given a platform, whose story do we know of? None of these are just theoretical, right? I mean, these all have to do with who we are and how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about people like us. I find these conversations really sensitive, really resilient, challenging, and really nurturing also, right? that's a bit of a path of how I'm here, right? The UW has been a great institutional home for me. Not always comfortable, but it's been a good home for me. And I'm a very, I think, lucky person to be able to have a career within an institution like the UW and also play in many, many other institutions and work with people outside of the academy as well. So I feel really grateful for that kind of inside and outside approach to my work here at UW. I think it enriches the UW that I do a lot of work outside of it. And I think it enriches my work outside that I've got a strong academic background and I remain connected to an institution like UW.
Thank you, and we're definitely grateful that you're part of the University of Washington community.
Amazing. Mm.
Because it's and then one of the things that I forgot to mention in your introduction is that you're a very popular professor. So students really resonate with your classes, and then you have received the highest teaching honor at the university. So
Thank you.
congratulations for that. Um, so, like I mentioned in the introduction, the Global Leadership Series, we started this program because we wanted to kind of like have students think about a career, but in a global perspective. You know, so that you come to the University of Washington, you know, they identify their major, and then kind of like help them see that, you know, in terms of a career, there's not only the U.S. but it's entirely the entire world. But one of the things that we and I have to admit this, we forgot to do is essentially start with the basics and really help students reflect as to why is it what is the self-reflection that you have to do about wanting to do a career abroad, and then how potentially your own identities and how you present can influence your experience overseas, which is one of the things that you talk
Mm.
about in your book. So I was wondering if you could talk about the importance of that self-reflection and how it could really help us have a meaningful experience once we go abroad.
Yeah, as I was writing my book, Felipe, I started realizing that writing about going abroad was also about writing about staying at home. So even though I'm now slowly becoming acquainted with the travel industry and people in the travel industry, it's a little odd for me because I feel like even though the book is thinking about being elsewhere, it's very much about being differently at home as well, right? So I think that's a important piece to trying to bring that reflective spirit, not when we're on a plane and we end up somewhere else, but wherever we are, what does it mean to bring a more reflective spirit into our day? Reflection, of course, is a term that we use a lot these days, no? And I think reflection means different things for different people. I'd love to ask our audience also. Actually, can you put it in the chat? What does reflection mean to you, right? I'll just wait a minute for some responses, and then I can share a little bit of how I come to that work.
So some answers have started to come in. Sarah mentioned to have an honest dialogue with oneself, to make sense of the past so that it can illuminate what's ahead. Quiet time to allow words, ideas, and creative visions to form. Um,
Oh, this is a former student of mine uh, sharing some of what she learned with us early into her work now. How sweet. Thank you, Tina.
mhm. Someone else mentioned considering the past, the present, and allow it to guide our
Mm.
future.
Taking a moment to sit with what was, is, will be, and what that means for, to, about self and others. There's so many nuances there, right? Thanks, Renata. Reflection is many things. It's both personal and shared opportunity for mindfulness, right? Past, present, allowing it to guide future. Oh, yes. Wakefulness with myself. That's a nice phrase. Recognize what makes me who I am. Beautiful. Journaling, analyzing thoughts and actions, right? Allows our friend to explore themselves more. Being true for oneself, being aware, active and frequent process. Yes, active and frequent correction. Reflection to me is about knowing where you fit into the world and what space you take up. Yes, thank you, Desiree. Sobering growth. Yes, Tanya. Yes. Thank you, everyone. I love all your responses. They're really, really beautiful, actually, to read one after the other. I would say for me as well, reflection is a range of what you've all shared. You know, I often think about how noisy our minds are. There's so much noise in them. And some of that noise is judgment, some of that noise is pressure, some of that noise is self doubt, some of that noise is I'm not pretty enough or smart enough or thin enough or whatever. There's so much noise. And within that noise, it's really hard to take a breath. It's really hard to find some stillness within ourselves to actually ask, what's going on for me? What's going on? What's coming up for me? And without having space to really ask ourselves those questions and have enough space to hold the answer with kindness, with curiosity and compassion, what do we do with our uncomfortable feelings? We bury them, we eat them away, we what? Distract ourselves, pick up our phone, we do 100 different things. So reflection to me is one of those kind of really small radical moves. It feels really radical to me, actually. It's so small. I'm actually finding a lot of solace in small and radical moves these days. Nothing big and dramatic for me. I'm really interested in some small moments of radicalness, right? And anytime we are able to uh, recognize that noise, take a moment and say, okay, hold on, you're really loud. Just stay there for a second. I need to think. And when we have that space to be able to think through some big ideas, then no matter if we're abroad or at home, right, we're able to at least grapple a little bit more honestly with what's in front of us. And what's in front of us is an exceptionally unequal world, right? Whether you're far or you're near home, it's especially an exceptionally unequal world, even if you are untouched by that, right? And so trying to be reflective of some of these bigger issues means making space to feel what comes up when I start paying attention to what's around me. I live in a comfortable, beautiful home. I have enough. I have more than enough. And I know that my life is just one life in many, many lives in this world. It's just one. I enjoy my life. I love my life. And it's just one, right? And that kind of awareness is about knowing how we're trying to fit with one another, what a society means, how do we actually live together and live together well? What does that look like? All of our movements for justice over the years, what is it for, right? What is it for? It's for what? Greater dignity, greater sense of solace, greater connection with oneself and each other? No? I'm not sure how we can do any of that without having those moments of reflection, right? It's certainly about, as so many of our participants have said, it's ways of linking what has happened in the past with where I am right now. It's also about cultivating the hope enough to dream for something else in the future, right? And to be able to do any of that, to look clearly at history, to look with openness at where we are right now, or to have the courage to dream for the future, we're going to have some space to do that, right? Space in our minds, space in our hearts, and literal gathering spaces, even virtual like this, but literal gathering spaces we need. No, it's hard to do this on our own. there's something really beautiful and collective about being able to grapple with these questions with one another, right? I push you, you push me, you deepen me, I might inspire something in you, right? It's a very shared project for me.
Thank you, Anu. So it almost feels like having that, and then some folks in the audience mentioned it, is having that self reflection. It's kind of like having a very difficult conversation with ourselves. Like someone mentioned, suffering growth, because that really makes us question, why is it that I want, to potentially live abroad, but also it gives us an opportunity to remind us that we are interconnected. Like you
Mm-hmm.
said, we're more of it's the one life that we live, but we're all connected as peoples in different ways.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And then like Dan mentioned, it was very poetic. Um, so one of the things that stood out to do in your book to me, and you and I had this conversation before, it's about your encouragement to help for folks to live their present, to live the now, and how when you live the now and navigate uh, uh, your space, whatever in the world you are right now, you could be exposed to differences, you could be exposed to inequalities, you could be exposed to a lot of the things that you don't have to go to another country to see. Like you could just see it in your backyard. So I
Mm.
was wondering if you could talk a little more about that, and why is it important for folks to navigate the now in order to prepare for a journey abroad.
Mm. I'll answer the question by sharing a few examples from some of my work shepherding UW students abroad. So I've been doing study abroad work since about 2003, and have had the incredible opportunity of taking different groups of students to several different places around the world in order to think through issues of belonging, identity, and justice from a global South perspective, right? And what I have learned from those experiences of shepherding students is that what so many students navigate abroad, especially in countries and in situations that look really different and feel really different and smell really different than what they're used to, what I've noticed is that the discomfort that comes up for a lot of students is seemingly very different than how folks feel at home, and also not so different. Let me just say what that means to me. Lots of my students from UW have grown up in middle class, upper middle class households and have had plenty, if not enough, much of their life. And traveling to Ghana or India or different parts of Mexico or South Africa or Honduras or many other places around the world in which lots more people have less can raise all kinds of uncomfortable feelings in travelers, right? The world is very unequal, and the more that we see one another, we start to realize our life is just but one, right? There's so many other um, situations in the world. And that sense of um, guilt and shame and what does it mean that I have, should I have, how do I feel about this? It feels really dramatic for a lot of my students when they are abroad, right? Because it's one of the first times that they have had to navigate and grapple and see things so differently than what they have experienced in Seattle or somewhere else. And while that's really so different in some ways, so many of my students, after they return home, start realizing, I was feeling this even at home, but I had buried it. I had been feeling this, but I'm always in my bubble, or I'm always plugged into my headphones, or I'm always in the noise. And being abroad, right? is one way that we disconnect from the everyday, right? So it's partly the newness of being elsewhere, it's partly the disconnection, and it's partly, of course, the unequal world that they see. But being able to kind of see how that plays out at home has been kind of scary for some of my students. Scary in an exciting way, scary in a deepening way, scary in a reflective way, right? Oh, this isn't just about going to Kenya and seeing poverty for the first time. This is also about how I have not seen poverty in my own hometown. How did that happen? How is it that I was never, I had never cultivated the lens to see any of these issues at home? How did I imagine that this was just an over there issue? What does that mean for me? These kinds of questions I think are really hard to wrestle with, right? This is why we need to do this work in community. It's much better to have these conversations with others over a cup of chai and some snacks, right? Because then you've got some warmth and camaraderie, and you can continually come back. When we have these high stakes, one conversation is supposed to do it all, that gets really complicated, right? No one conversation can do it all. I'm I'm very much in favor of low stakes, regular conversations about hard and tricky things. Low stakes, right? Where I can make a mistake, you can make mistakes, we can be vulnerable, we can kind of figure it out. We've got some trust, camaraderie. We know we're going to come back next Tuesday evening again. So we didn't finish it all this week. It's all right. We're going to come back next week. Low stakes and regular, right? To me, that's a way to put into practice some of our reflection. It's a way to make our travels abroad meaningful for when we're back at home, right? The worst thing is to think, oh, that was there, and that's the end of my reflections. I'm back in my regular life. I'm so curious to think about how we can connect these experiences. Those of us that have had opportunities to go elsewhere, whether it's very, very far from home or even closer by, going somewhere else is incredible. It can be, right? There's really nothing else like it in some ways, to put your mind and body and heart and your nose and your tongue in different places, right? It's great. But I'd like to also be able to carry those experiences with me while I'm at home and have an even more enriching, meaningful life. I can't always be traipsing around the world. I'd love to, but I can't always be doing that, right? I'm also just a regular person living in my regular town, doing my regular work, right? So again, trying to find more links between who we want to be at home and how our trips abroad can illuminate some of that for us, and thinking about how we want to be abroad, and thinking about how we can kind of create that foundation at home, right? So for me, again, there's so many links between staying and going, being at home, traveling abroad. I see it as one broader journey,
Yeah.
right?
And it's kind of like as higher education professionals, we recognize that study abroad is one of the high impact practices, right? That it has significant growth because, kind of like what you mentioned, puts students in a different in a different part of the country. I mean, a different part of the world. I'm sorry, they may not necessarily speak the language, so they have to really navigate that now. But when I read your book, navigating your now, and then
Mm-hmm.
the incredible growth that happens when you just pay attention to your surroundings, and then
Yeah,
you don't necessarily have to go get on a plane and go somewhere to be able to experience that and be able to grapple and realize
yeah,
that we're not that different. To me, it was one of the things that resonated from your book the most, and I wanted to make sure folks in the audience also got to hear that. But how about this? The next question that I have, kind of like, is going to shift gears a little bit. But before we change topics, I want to see if anyone from the audience has any questions or any reactions to what you just mentioned before we go into a different topic. So if you have any questions for Anu, uh, please raise your hand and mute yourself, or uh, type it in the chat, and I'll read the question on your behalf.
one thing as folks are thinking about a question or a comment that I want to share, Felipe, from what you just said, is that more and more I'm realizing that when I deepen my breath, I deepen my attention. And when I deepen my attention, I deepen my breath. I'm seeing such a powerful link between those two, right? And I mean that on a literal level as well as kind of a metaphysical level too, right? When I drop down and get less distracted by the 100 things that's all around me and kind of just take a breath and think, okay, right now, right here, right now, I'm able to notice so much more, right? And when I'm able to notice so much more, other time periods kind of drop away. I'm able to be here in the now. And I think that that is, for me, it's been such a critical tool and technique to not drown in the guilt of having more and having this incredibly privileged life that I do, right? I want to think about how do you be mindful of all that you have and not constantly be flogging yourself for it in the name of justice. That doesn't sound right to me, right? I want to be able to think about this, uh, think about the riches that might be attached to my particular life and think about how do I, number one, redistribute what I have. So if I've got more than I need to redistribute part of what I have. That's a critical piece of my justice work. Number two, once I have redistributed some of my what I have, right, to think about what does solidarity with others look like? What does it mean to hold space for stories that are not mine? Right? You can't empathize. We talk about empathy as being the kind of thing that connects us, and I agree, it's critical, but it's also such a strange thing because I'm not you. I don't know you. I can't know your experience. You also don't know me and can't know my experience, and yet we talk about trying to empathize with one another all the time. So we can really only be with ourselves as fully and wholly as we can, right? And that full wholeness being with ourselves, what would it be if it was less noisy, if it had less guilt and shame attached to it, less doubt to it, and if it had more integrity, then when I am with you, I am able to hold space with you so much cleaner, so much cleaner. I'm not bringing all my stuff into it. And that's when you and I are talking here, Felipe. It's also when I'm abroad and I'm in conversations and situations with people whose lives look really different than mine. Right. And so if I'm just caught up in the noisiness of my own head of, oh my God, I can't believe I have so much, I can't believe it, continuous like that, I'm totally checked out of the present. I'm not even there with the lady that's talking to me or the child that I'm interacting with. I'm not present. Right. So yeah, something about kind of breath, attention, staying with yourself in order to hold space with others, right? Not staying with yourself for narcissism's sake. That's different, right? Narcissism is a totally different thing. Staying with yourself so you're able to connect with others on a deeper, more humane and honest way, right? That's what I think a lot about these days.
And that's usually what we think about with global exchange, right? It's that those things that you wonderful things that you just mentioned are naturally going to happen, but sometimes that's not the case.
Mm,
And then how do we really make it a point to going back to the self-reflection and the ability to have the conversation with ourselves, and what is it that I bring to this, whether it be just a fleeing moment in interaction in this particular country, but at the same time why it could be a beautiful learning moment,
yeah.
right?
And part of this, of course, is anytime we're able to connect with another, it's very sweet. It gets also fraught and
Hmm.
complicated because of our unequal world, right? Study abroad on the one hand, is this incredible vehicle for young people, study abroad, internships, volunteering abroad, all of that, right? It's this incredible vehicle for folks, often in privileged countries, to see, just a second,
Mhm.
to see and experience life elsewhere. And again, there's nothing like it to be elsewhere and to see, taste, smell, and hear life differently. But in an unequal world, who's going where,
Mhm.
at whose expense, who gets to go learn, go back home, and have greater opportunity because now their CV says they're a global citizen, right? That enterprise fills me with a lot of skepticism. Even though I'm a part of study abroad, even though I'm a part of that machinery, I also take mostly privileged students to less wealthy lands, introduce them to, I think, incredible people who are doing really change making work on the ground. I hope to broaden my students' sense of what's possible, broaden their understanding of justice, and broaden their humility along the way. But I'm also a part of that machinery that
Mhm.
is now kind of seen as better because now I've got some, global stamps in my passport, and my CV says that I've been here and here, and you know, it's an uncomfortable place to be. But I like doing my work from that uncomfortable place because I think it keeps us a little bit more honest, right? It's
Yeah.
sort of, on the one hand, if you say, oh, nobody should go anywhere because it's an unequal world and it's so vexed, that's one extreme. The other extreme is go anywhere you want, it doesn't matter. The world is your oyster, go. Neither of those extremes feel good to me, right? Because each side is missing something critical, and so I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm holding, both sides precariously, not quite not quite holding it well all the time, but I'm certainly holding both sides, right?
Mhm.
We live life somewhere in the middle of these big dichotomies, right?
There was a previous speaker that we had. One of the things that she said that resonated with a lot of the students in the audience was your discomfort is your currency for growth.
Mm,
And then with that, it was that it doesn't, whether it be, going abroad or whether it be just trying, a new class or just a new experience, how there could be a teaching, a learning opportunity in that discomfort, and how that discomfort could potentially lead to other opportunities that wouldn't have been possible if you didn't take that first step.
but again, right, more questions in an unequal world come up for us.
Oh yeah.
Who's learning off of whose back?
Hmm.
Who gets further ahead? Who will never have opportunities to come to my land and study for a month and go back and have their resume nicely padded so they can go on to new opportunities? How do the long history of colonialism and imperialism that have structured the world the way it is, how do I, as a part of the study abroad and global learning enterprise, the travel industry, how do I participate in that, even as I'm trying to dismantle it?
Hmm.
Right? Again, kind of sitting in the middle of all these thorny ideas at once. We need time and space and breath and attention and chai and snacks to talk about this together as a community, right? It's not just my issue. It's not just your issue. This is our issue. If we want a better world, but we are navigating an unequal world, then what? What does that mean? No?
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
So then the last question that I had before turning it over to the audience is this concept of cultural humility. Like we tell students, you need to practice cultural humility,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes we don't really take the time to define for them what that means. So I was wondering, based on everything that we talked about, if you could tell us what cultural humility means to you and why it's important to practice it.
Mm-hmm. I think at different stages of my life, it's meant different things, Felipe. You know, I think early on in my 20s, it meant giving money to the child that asked for money when I was abroad. That was what it felt like at the time. I'm now realizing more and more that it's not just about, or let me just back up, like in my clumsy attempts to redistribute, uh, that was what I thought, giving back or redistribution meant early in my youth. Now, as I've thought much more about it and I've talked to a lot more people and I've had some time and space to think, um, notions of cultural humility for me are about something I said a little while ago, like knowing that our life is but just one life. That to me is, again, such a simple idea, but so profound. It really floors me. I'm just one life of so many lives. That's it. Again, I like my life. I'm glad I'm me, but I'm just one of many, many, many. And that sense of smallness, not being insignificant, right? Not questioning my worth, but that sense of smallness with the grandness of the world, like that sense of smallness puts me in a position where I can listen more, puts me in a position where I don't have to know everything, puts me in a position where I can ask more curious questions, right? I mean, if I thought that I was all that, I'm coming in really differently than if I think, oh, I'm just one person in such a big world. And that humility, especially as we're crossing boundaries, especially as we're engaging with people whose lives might look different than ours, home or abroad. I think understanding that we are just one of many is for me like a really grounding way to think about how do we jostle for space and for recognition in such a crowded planet. What does that actually mean? Whose whose lives are worthy of our attention? How do we hold space for all that we interact with? I love being small. I just love being small. Again, when I was young, I thought I had to be big, right? Because that's sort of, the American way, supersize everything and, be the best and all of that thing. But again, the more that I learn and the more that I grow, the older I get, I love being small in my bigness or being big in your smallness or however you want to play with those words, right? But there's something about relative size and scope of who we are in relation to all that is out there that fills me with so much awe and wonder, right? And that awe and wonder helps me from thinking that I know more, helps me from thinking that I need to teach everybody that it's my way, that I'm the right one or anything. No, I'm just one of many. You know what I mean about that smallness? It's a really big smallness though, right? So that's where it gets kind of playful. We can really play with those ideas, right?
Yeah, totally. It's like it almost also feels like it by thinking of ourselves as small, it kind of like it gives a sense of freedom also. The freedom of wanting to learn and be like, yeah, like it's okay not to know everything, but at the same time, like navigating the now, and then being able to have that opportunity to fully engage in that particular moment of that experience.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So thank you, Anu. So I want to turn it over to, this is a conversation. So I was wondering if anyone, I've seen that chat has been active. So I'm wondering if anyone has any reactions to what Anu has said or questions that came up as we engage in this conversation. Uh,
What's on your mind, people? Family says it's like you say at the end of your book, Anu, we are in a cycle. When we are going to sleep, someone else somewhere is rising. Right. Yes. Thank you. Night here, morning there is how I end the book. Um, with my reflections on when I get to go to sleep. I sleep knowing that people on the other side of the world are waking and trying to make life better for more people in their community. And when folks rest on that side of the world, I hope they know that I'm waking to make life a little bit better for more people in my community. And so that kind of cycle back and forth um, keeps me small, keeps me small, but connected, right? That's the key, small and connected. It's small and connected, because when we are small and connected, we are so much bigger than ourselves, no? Yeah.
And Dimitri saying that that was a beautiful line.
Mm, thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to say I really like how you mentioned being small. Really like brings curiosity, and I think that's so true because I feel like when you're curious and when you think you want to learn, and when you want to learn, it like fires curiosity in your brain, and you want to ask all these questions. And I feel like it allows the other person to open up more. It creates this like comfortable space to really open about their culture and like who they are. And I feel like that also like creates this like connection between the people because one person is like opening up, the other one is like, you know, sharing and then also but also listening. And I really like that. I just wanted to mention.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Very nicely said. Mm.
Thank you, Nugent. Um, and then Vina in the chat also mentioned that it's I think it's a sense of surrender or awareness that we're in a teeny tiny part of a bigger universe that helps to position ourselves better, that we can bring attention to center ourselves.
Mm.
It's true.
Yeah,
Which is
definitely.
similar to what Anujan was saying
Mm.
also. So here's what we could do, because we really Anu has said so many wonderful things. So I was wondering if I could just put all of us into breakout rooms for a little bit, so we could process, and then being able to share maybe perhaps in a smaller group some of the things that Anu mentioned, and then we could come back to the larger group. So okay. So welcome back, everyone. So Anu and I, we continue our conversation, but we're wondering if some of you will be willing to share what you talked about in your breakout rooms.
I'd love to hear from a couple of you. What's resonating for you? What's on your mind? Mm. Nice, Banu.
I was fascinated for learning the two, at least two. Bahanu didn't have a chance to talk, but he or she typed. But I learned a lot about, not a lot, with limited time. Philippa only gave us 5 minutes.
Mm.
Nathan and Dimitri was sharing their experience. We started with asking how they came to today's Zoom, how it's all connected. Nathan is doing something really cool, and Dimitri was taking a class with you. Oh, wait, Dimitri, you took a class with you, right?
He's taking it now, yes.
Yeah, so it's like hearing their stories, like in how they're inspired by the work that you do, and then the class that you're teaching is really fascinating as well. Yeah, Nathan, do you mind to share a little bit about that program you're doing with your I guess.
I wanted to hear about. I think what you had to share was actually really profound. I'll go after you if you go just a little bit.
Okay, fair enough. So I try to be small, but Filipinos, sometimes when I talk, I sound really big. But I'm not very good. English is not my first language. I grew up in China, but unlike a lot of Chinese students, nowadays international students see, I actually came from a very poor Jiangxi province, probably the third poorest place, and then my home wouldn't be the places where nowadays study abroad would go there. They wouldn't go there because it's just too poor, not much to see. So I was sharing Nathan and Dimitri and Bahanu, correct me if I'm not right. So sharing in our group about how, you know, when you talked about taking students with, you know, some sort of privilege or maybe in a bit, having a little bit more, right? Have more to go into these other places to kind of wrestling with based on equalness. I was like talking about how like the constant throughout, you know, I got really busy here in my head, but I was constantly on the other end, the students, because that's where I grew up. On my wall, it was taken away. Maybe husband can help me find it. We took this photo of my home, the house that I grew up. Can you find the house photo? But it was this really brick house. That's the house I was born in. I grew up in. It's still there. I fixed it and had my parents live back in there. But constantly for me is my entire life, 16 years old, I made it out and I went to Beijing for college. And then somehow magically I made it to the US. So my entire life, you know, has been wrestling between, not only I had to, like, you know, for the students go study abroad, right? They went there to visit and they come back to the world. Maybe they stayed and did something different. But my entire world is being pulled toward these places. I will go to Beijing, you know, tutoring all these rich kids, right? Or, you know, seeing all these wonderful things, you know, development in Beijing, great buildings, and even my school, it's really awesome. And then every summer and winter, I go back to my home, to my not mud house, but like a brick house and all of that. Constantly rebelling, okay, who I am, you know, is that real me? Is this real me? Do I have a choice? You know, where I am, who I am, who do I want to be? How do I define myself? Yeah. And then come to US, right? Because like what you said, from the other end, like you can, like the education, the culture I got is that no matter where I go, I am who I am. The root is who I am. I cannot give up. And I even use that as my partner choosing criteria. It's like if my partner can't really recognize my root, you know, can't go to visit me to recognize who I am, you know, they don't understand who I am. And then the other thing that I share with my group is on the other end, you know, when I hear you saying that, you know, if I know you're coming here, you know, making yourself look small and then not like saying you give me this big talk, right? I will feel more willing, more genuine, wanting to have a conversation with you, right? To take away that big or small or who's more, who's richer, but then have a genuine conversation, human to human, right? That's kind of like where I was. Maybe is that Nathan was what you were expecting? I'm sorry. The story can be told differently in a different time. Sorry.
I mean, you know, I thank you so much for sharing some of that. You know, what I really resonate from what you just shared is that this idea of traveling between identities is something that many of us are already doing on a day-to-day basis, right? Even before we get on that trip somewhere, many of us are wrestling with the who am I question, the do I belong here? What does it mean that I grew up in this place and now I'm here, or any of these things. Even when we're standing still, our hearts are moving in a lot of different directions, right? And so that is, I think, a really important perspective for us to also kind of keep in mind, right? Most travel stories, especially from this part of the world, are the white, advantaged traveler traveling with lots of means, resources to see the world and, you know, kind of expand themselves. And that narrative can be meaningful, certainly, I'm not discounting it, but that's only one narrative of many, many stories of travel, migration, forced travel. Those are, so many of us are traveling across such different kinds of boundaries and binaries and identities. That's also travel, right? It's not just this wealthy white person going somewhere else on holiday, but what would it mean if we really expanded the conversation so that your story is also part of the travel narrative, right? I think we would be so much more enriched and have such a more kind of honest account of what our world means, no? Yeah, thanks. Thank you for that.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
Nathan, say it, please.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. I find that so profoundly interesting, just the different layers of identity and travel. And this whole night's been great. Is it Felipe? Thank you so much. Thank you, Circle. Thank you, Anu. I've talked to Anu a few times, and there's just so much I want to say. I am big, learning how to be smaller, but yeah, we do. I'm part of an organization that takes folks to the American South, and we look at Black history, and we go to places where Black history happened, and we do it with people from the civil rights era to people doing work now, and we do it with a cross difference. And so we take people, Black, white, we all kinds of different races and nationalities, genders and sexualities. So we bring together people across difference to learn about what we call kind of that founding oppression. And I mean, I guess there's so much I want to say, but Anu, I would love something I've been thinking about, I've been reflecting on, is the idea of restorative justice, of transformative justice, of the rejection sort of this language around reconciliation. What the feedback I hear from people of color, BIPOC people, is that we can't reconcile what was never whole. But I think you would agree that there's a tremendous amount of healing that needs to be done, of repair that needs to be done, and thinking of journey as a way of engaging with that repair, of being in a place with someone and being in community as a way of healing and repair, but not assuming the reconciliation of it all when you don't look like me. And I'd love, if you had any thoughts at all, I'd love to hear.
I have a lot of thoughts. They're all competing. So 1 second, let me just take a breath. Healing from the foundational wound, when the wound is still festering, feels really impossible in so many ways, right? And so healing is always imperfect. If we're talking about race, right? Healing is always imperfect. These are some of the same dynamics that I'm wading through on a daily basis as I do lots of racial equity consulting, right? Bringing folks together close by or far away in order to make better sense of how history has wrought us now, has wrought us differently and has brought us differently. We need time and space and a sense of possibility in that, right? Is that reconciliation? I don't know. There's a lot of nuances to that term, right? Does the phrase restorative justice work better for us? In some ways, yes. I'm somewhere in the middle of all of those terms, or maybe a different way to say it is, I find them really useful at different moments, right? I think healing work needs so many different strategies because we're healing from such different kinds of wounds. And so in some moments we will need, tea and snacks. In other moments, we will need long walks in a park. In another moment, we will need to read and think and write together. In another moment, we will need to journey somewhere together in order to see something that we need to witness together. Those are all different moments of healing and require really different responses from us, right? So I guess I don't get too worried about the term that I'm working with because so much of our vocabulary is, it's rich, it's got lots of history, and vocabulary to me is meant to be used at different moments, right? Yeah.
Fluid, right? Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
fluid.
you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nathan, and thank you, Dan, for your insights and for being willing to share that about the discussion that you had in the breakout rooms.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if anyone else had something that they wanted to share.
Sure, I can share. Renata and I talk. My name's Tammy. My pronouns are she and hers. And Renata and I were in a group together. And Renata's microphone isn't working, or the sound is off. So that was really interesting for us to talk to in different mediums. But we did. We had a great conversation. Oh, we mainly talked about the travel industry, and I'm in the travel industry. And we were talking about how much we appreciate the spirit of the book. Like our big takeaway from the book was like making space for the conversations, for these conversations, and for the inequities and the discomfort, and actually just making space for those conversations, and perhaps how the travel industry can do that, because it seems that, you know, in traveling abroad and in university studies, that is a natural place for somebody to, you know, hold the conversation. But and how do we do it in the travel industry? Like when, and then we kind of got into the nuances of travel, like the way some people travel, because I come from the adventure travel space and sustainable travel space, and there's probably more room for that, but that you still need to set the intention in the beginning, you know, that someone knows this is going to happen, because sometimes there's these expectations of a, you know, they want to have a very pleasant trip. Yet most people in the adventure and sustainable travel, this is the very reason that they travel, is to open up minds and hearts. And so if tour operators and tour guides can actually make space for those conversations, and Nathan, I'm really interested in what you do, because it seems that, I mean, yours is obviously, if someone's going, there is that intention there too. But then Renata and I also talked about, you know, there's other people that travel whose motivation is just purely for leisure, purely on a cruise ship, and they just want a vacation. And yeah, just the difference between the ways people travel. And that's why I appreciate what you said, Anu, too, about the different kinds of travel that there is, that might even not necessarily be the travel industry, but could be migration, or yeah, or in our own minds.
Yeah, thanks, Tammy.
Yeah.
I guess one thing that I'm in conversation with a lot of people these days is, you know, sometimes these conversations, we come at it thinking, oh, that's heavy, or that's depressing, or that takes away from my fun. And, you know, for me, when I am abroad with a group, conversations like this are not, I don't think of it as we're dragging the group down into heaviness. I think we're like being more open and honest about the way that the world has been set up and what it means to be in a world. And so again, if we only associate conversations about identity, power, history, and inequity with guilt and shame, then no wonder it doesn't fit with this customer service model of, I want a good trip, I want to be happy on my trip. It doesn't fit. But if we kind of think about these conversations less about guilt and shame, and more about what does it mean to live together with good intentions in an unequal world? Aren't you curious about that? I'm curious about that. Let's talk. If it's more in that spirit, then I think there's a lot more openness, there's a lot more curiosity, there's a lot more, well, of course we're talking about this on our trip. And that's what makes it an enjoyable trip, right? So then it's not just about happy, surface, depressing, deep, because that feels really, that's pathetic, that's how it feels for a lot of folks, right? So what would that look like? Again, lots of people are in conversation about this these days. What does that look like? How do you infuse kind of teaching and learning around equity and identity into the travel industry that is so reliant on people to feel like they've had a good experience? What does that look like? How do we nuance that well, right? On one level, it's, you know, can I teach this class? Am I going to get good evaluations? That's on a small level, but, you know, thinking about it on a bigger level is like travel industry or study abroad or something, no? Oh,
Yeah,
Juana is asking, am I teaching anything next quarter? Yes, I'm teaching English. I think it's 259. You're most welcome to check it out.
And Banu's an English major, as a matter of fact. So there you go. Thank you. Uh, Thank you, Tammy, for that as well.
Thank you.
So I'm looking at the time. We have time for one last question, and after that, I'll turn it over to you, Anu, to see if any final thoughts that you want to share with all of us.
Sure.
I have a question. I don't know if it's not, might not be as good a question, but if you guys have any deeper questions, feel free to ask. I have a very small question, I guess. Unless somebody else have a. Okay.
Yep.
Should I ask? So I wonder, when you take students to study abroad, do they usually stay, like, where do they stay? Do they usually stay with the local family, or do they usually, like, we have a designated place for them to stay? And did you notice that will make a difference to the students?
Yeah, that's a great question. My programs in different countries look different because of the partnerships and all. I have a mix between usually hostels and homestays with families. I think it's really important, not to do the kind of 5-star everything. No student needs that, of course. So most of the places we stay are really modest, very, very modest places that have just the basics, good and clean basics, with a lot of engagement with local people in different ways. In Ghana, for example, one of the places that our students stay is a space that has been thought of as a volunteer home. And so lots of folks from abroad come and stay there. And it's in a very small rural area, like 30 miles outside of the capital. And so living in this house with other foreigners who have come to work or study in a very rural area it's kind of comforting in some ways, and it's really destabilizing in a lot of ways. And so it's a great combination and a really wonderful space to learn. In where we stay in Mexico City is a place that's actually a Quaker home. It's a Quaker space where there are some rooms that we can rent, very modest rooms. And it's also a space where lots of refugees come and land as they are waiting for their immigration paperwork to go through the system. And so when my students, the several times we've been there, when my students have been there, there's also anywhere from 10 to 20 refugees from all over the world, from Niger and Iran and Pakistan and Guinea and Senegal and South Africa, all living together in a home, jostling with each other and getting to know one another. And so having that experience in the middle of Mexico City is you're learning about, again, travel from so many different angles, right? So like that, we try to find spaces that are kind of a mix of a lot of things. Yeah.
Thank you. Make me want to go travel with your program.
Thank you.
Thank you then for that question. And Anu, any concluding thoughts that you want to share with us?
I'm just so delighted that all of you joined us for this very sweet and intimate conversation this evening. Thank you so much for spending part of your night with us. There's so many of you here that we haven't heard from yet, but I'm hoping that you're kind of thinking and reflecting on some of what we spoke about. Keep talking, have some, once we're able to be out and about with one another, right? What space are you creating with others with some chai and snacks to talk about hard and real and honest things, right? That's what we do. That's what we keep doing, isn't it?
Mm. It's about those difficult conversations with each other and that self-reflection.
Yeah, thank you so much, Felipe and Circle, for this very sweet invitation. Thank you.
No, thank you for accepting. I think it was wonderful, always a pleasure. And then before we go, everyone, can you help me thanking Anu for the wonderful
Thanks.
talk?
Thanks.
Thank you, Anu.
Thank you all.
And then I'm just gonna